So for me, getting into how you tell that story, you have to not make it about you, right? If I come to the website and I'm looking at your startup, I don't care if it was two guys in a garage with $50 and some duct tape and a candy bar wrapper and a paper clip like we used before. That's just really not important to me as a potential customer. What's important to me is, what are you going to do for me, right? Yeah. What is the thing that you're going to do better than anybody else? How are you going to solve my problem? But ultimately, the one that people really don't look at enough, I think, is the transformation, because everything that anybody buys is a result of a transformation or an aspiration that they have.
This is the Ideas Lab podcast, where you can learn from great creative and entrepreneurial minds how to turn your ideas into original businesses, books, and brands. Because in a crowded world, it pays to stand out. This is your host, John Williams, best-selling author and founder of the Ideas Lab London. Michael Burns is a storyteller, copywriter, speaker, and comedy performer. I met him here in Bali, and he's got quite an interesting career history. Michael will take us in this episode on a journey from working on Seinfeld to an online record label to reality show producer to copywriter. And he explains how to tell the story of your business in a way that's actually interesting and engaging to your customers. So, here we are in Bali, and you live here, Michael. Tell me, I want to know a little bit about your history and how you ended up here, because you had a fascinating career. But what are you now, and how do you describe what you do?
So primarily what I tell people is that I'm a storyteller. And so I basically work as a digital marketing copywriter. And also in part of that function, I also do consulting where I'm doing brand strategy and brand storytelling. And I also do some real life storytelling, teaching workshops and seminars and speaking in front of crowds of people about various topics.
Right, yeah. And you're an avid comedy, stand-up performer and improv person. So maybe we'll get to that a little bit later. But I was fascinated by your early career where you were, one of the things you did was you were a grip in TV production, and most people have no idea what a grip is. You see it on the end of films, and what does a grip actually do?
So we provide camera and lighting support, and how that plays out is the camera people operate the cameras. They used to put in film, but not so much these days. Focus the cameras, point them in the right direction. If the camera goes on a tripod, they do that. Put in the filters on the cameras. But if the camera needs to be moved on a dolly or a crane or rigged off the side of a vehicle like a bus or a scooter or a Zeppelin, or it needs to be built into a platform or set up in a bunker because something's going to crash into it, the grips handle all of that sort of thing. We do the things where we put the camera in a position where it moves, so those long tracking shots or those crane shots like Quentin Tarantino has in his new movie where it goes over the house. That's all done by grips. And then on the other side of that, very similarly, you have the electricians who supply power to the set, and they plug in the lights, and they use a certain amount of diffusion on the lights that connects directly to the light and point the lights and focus the lights. But grips come in and put in screens and diffusion to, one, create natural shadow effects and make the light not so harsh, and also to make actually rather normal looking people into what we think are glamorous movie stars. So pretty much the grips are very underrated. Without grips, the camera would kind of lie on the floor on its side most of the time, and the people would be really ugly that it was filming.
Yeah, and there'd be none of those kind of sexy tracking shots which really make a film where, the camera moves with the person and the backgrounds, perspectives all changing, all that kind of stuff.
Yeah, and even in the case of when it's a Steadicam shot where that camera is actually connected on a gimbal to an operator, the grips are still there because they're basically blocking for him and clearing him out of the way, and often they're moving lighting implements in and out of the shot so that you can see the effect, but then where the guy has to walk, they move some equipment, and so he can continue on his path by there. So,
Wow. So you're like a combination of the camera person and electrician and sort of building person, like everything.
Yeah, it was a neat job. It was always an interesting challenge. Like our old joke was, people would say, okay, well, we need this. And like, okay, what do you got? And then you would just assemble whatever is needed out of whatever is in the truck and it is
So you're
available.
a professional MacGyver.
Basically, yeah. Basically, in a lot of
If
ways,
anyone's
that's
old
what
enough
we did.
to get that reference.
We can do some things with, toothpick, duct tape, and a candy bar wrapper that will blow your mind, man.
Yeah. So, you worked on some big shows like Seinfeld for how long?
I did the final season of Seinfeld.
Oh, cool.
Yeah, and I have a small claim to fame on there. I'm actually the person who set up the Festivus poll on the famous episode, which is actually in a book, so it must be true.
Oh, wow.
And we didn't know at the time when we were filming the episode, which is called The Strike, because Kramer's on strike from a bagel shop that he was working at. And we didn't know it was going to become this big cultural phenomenon. And actually, I found out several years later that my godfather had been having a Festivus party for many years. And then when he found out that, I was involved in the show and had done that, now it's like kind of a big deal if I stipe into the party and talk to everybody and give it a blessing. So
and just to explain Festivus, this is George Costanza's father, wasn't it, who invented it?
Yeah, in the show, it was George Costanza's father, and it was sort of the holiday in response to the over-commercialism of Christmas, and it used an unadorned aluminum pole with no tinsel because it was distracting, and there were no gifts. There was an airing of grievances where you told everybody how they had disappointed you all year, and then feats of strength. And actually, we held the first Festivus on Bali that we're aware of. We had a party December 22nd, 2016 at a Ubud co-working space. And and the staff made me a really nice bamboo Festivus pole, which also has a very high strength to weight ratio, much like aluminum, although bamboo is closer to steel, which most people don't know.
Right.
It's incredibly strong.
Wow. And Jerry, is he a nice guy?
Yeah, one of the hardest working people I've ever been around, actually. He had his finger on everything and was a solid guy and made sure everybody was treated really good and got good food to eat, and he was a good guy. Yeah, they were all great, really. It was probably one of the best jobs I've ever had in my life. Definitely in my top 3. Yeah,
you don't make $175 million by accident. Somebody interviewed him, somebody caught him on the street once and said to him, said like, why do you continue to work? He filmed it and thought, I'll get an interview with Jerry. And Jerry was getting on his bicycle. And the guy said, why do you continue to work? You don't need to work. And he goes, yes, I do. He said, what are you going to do? Are you going to just sit around all day? You think that's going to make you happy? And then he just rode off of that, because he can be quite shirty with people who kind of interrupt him and stuff. But it was a really good point, and that's the reason why, even though his net worth is estimated to be 175 million, he continues making shows like comedians getting coffee in cars. Have I got that right around?
Yeah.
Which is one of my favourite programs, and probably you'll love it if you're into comedy.
Did you see the one with Mel Brooks and Carl Reiner? That one was the best. I mean, those guys are just legends. And
I loved John, the British guy.
John Oliver?
Yes, John Oliver.
Yeah,
I thought that was
also
fantastic.
Yeah, great show.
Yeah. So you wear a grip, and you ended up being a copywriter. Maybe storyteller, I think, is a better term, because that is close to what you do. Because you came into it by quite a creative way, and you bring this knowledge of film and video and also comedy and everything else. Why don't we talk a bit about what you're doing now? If somebody wants to describe and tell the story of their business or their venture, normally when people do that, most people have absolutely no idea how to do that, do they? And when we write about our own business, it ends up incredibly boring. So what is it? Because I did talk to you about this earlier, and I thought you had a really good philosophy. So how do you make stories interesting when you're describing your project, your business, your charity, whatever it might be?
Well, the way I look at it is this, and it's not just me. I think there's a number of people that think like this, but ultimately, when you consider how big the internet is and how many businesses are out there, right? Somebody's somewhere is doing what you do. In fact, there might be a million people doing what you do, right? And so the way that you're going to be different is by the story you tell. And having a story of some sort is very important, because this what resonates with people. Yeah. You can give them facts all day long, but a story that resonates emotionally with a person is going to make them buy more, which you know right away, right? There's always the old sell to the pain thing, which is very true, but there's also another level of that as well. I can talk to you about in a second. So for me, getting into how you tell that story, you have to not make it about you, right? If I come to the website and I'm looking at your startup, I don't care if it was two guys in a garage with $50 and some duct tape and a candy bar wrapper and a paper clip like we used before. That's just really not important to me as a potential customer. What's important to me is, like, what are you going to do for me, right?
Yeah.
What is the thing that you're going to do better than anybody else? How are you going to solve my problem? But ultimately, the one that people really don't look at enough, I think, is the transformation, because everything that anybody buys is a result of a transformation or an aspiration that they have. So whether that's buying a Tesla, not so, like, you buy a Tesla, but you think, okay, well, this is great. I'm buying a car for the environment, and I'm going against the gas companies and stuff. But the ultimate thing is you want to be the coolest kid on the block. That's why you buy a Tesla, and that's the transformation, right? And so a lot of people aren't even aware of the transformation that they want from something. So it's a matter of kind of triggering that a little bit in the copywriting as well. So your story ultimately needs to be about how your potential customer is interacting with your brand and the journey they're going to go on, and how are you solving their problems and satisfying their inner desires for this transformation.
Yeah. No, that's really interesting. And I think, you're right. There's the sort of one side selling to the pain, and then there's also selling to the aspiration, which might not even be very conscious. But if somebody gets a flash of an image in their brain of them as a, sexier, fitter, richer, more spiritually enlightened person, whatever it is, according to what you're selling, that's a big part of why they're buying. And so how do you capture that, though, in a story? You're basically saying, like on the homepage, how do you tell a story about the person who's just turned up?
So sometimes, like, when we think of story, we think of something very straightforward. But a story is really the journey also that you're taking the person on in their mind when they're reading it. So by writing a story in the context, and instead of saying we do this and we do that, but asking questions, maybe yes questions, like, are you feeling depressed and burned out from too many hours in the office? Are you looking for a change in your life, right? Things that trigger people to go, oh, yes, that's me. Yes, that's me. And then they logically will continue following along, because you're now leaving them a trail of breadcrumbs that is leading them down through their pain and into that transformation stage, right? So there's part of it. And that's when we talk about a story, it's a little bit of a broader context. So having a lot of empathetic statements is really important. You really want to show empathy. And also, like I said, really trying to highlight those things that you're doing for them. And changing, even when maybe you write a draft of something and you're like, well, we do this, or Joe Blow Corporation does that. And then it's a matter of turning that sentence around and putting it customer facing. And on your About page is a really great place for this too, because
I thought this philosophy of yours on the About page was really interesting, because what you're saying is it's not really, when you're writing the About page, the best thing is actually not to make it about you, which is quite odd.
Right. Well, I think that has a place, because somebody eventually may want to know that information, and it's nice to show off. I believe you've said this before, as your bona fides, right? People want to know that you are an actual doctor and not just a guy who got sent in the thing off the back of a cereal box to some small country that may not exist and got a certificate, right? But that stuff can be farther down the page, and really an About page is a really secret opportunity to sneak in another sales page to your site. And so the top half of that page, or top third, can really be about really creating a relationship with that customer. And also, this is a good spot to put in what Donald Miller, who wrote this great book, Building a Story Brand, calls an agreement plan, where you're talking about the things that you're promising a customer. Whole Foods has a really nice example of this on their website. But so that people know that you're going to be trusted, they're going to get a certain amount of service every time, that you're here to solve their problems and work with them, and then sneak a call to action in there, and then get into we were two guys in a garage with a paper clip and a candy bar wrapper and duct tape, and now it's a computer, and then get to that part.
And sometimes that story can serve a purpose, and it can be inspiring, because if we think of the story of, for instance, Apple, or I don't know, like Microsoft or something like that, the relevance is not that we go, okay, some people might be going, okay, Bill Gates, Steve Jobs is amazing, But the more important reason for telling that story is actually it's inspiring for you. It's like, oh, okay, if you can start in a garage with nothing and just a couple of geeks knock out a computer and then build it into something that's one of the most valuable companies in the world, then that's an inspiring story for me. And because Steve Jobs always kind of never said like, I'm clever and you can't do this. Now, in reality, he is clever. Most of us can't do it. But his story, your own success story, can be used as an inspiration for other people.
Yeah, I totally agree. I think that the key to that is making it relatable, right?
Yeah.
And just really making it seem that, you know, the person that you're telling that story to can be part of your story, and trying to keep it down to earth, and you know, be able to integrate into there the values that you have as a company and the things that a person would find relatable and appreciate about your company and your story. And even, again, sneak another call to action in there at the bottom of the page if it feels right to do it.
A call to action like?
Oh, well, like, depends on what you're selling, but there's you know, buy this, click here to learn more, click here to download our free PDF of, you know, how to build your own computer in a garage with random elements, you know. So it depends on what your product or service is, but there's ways to, you know, integrate that seamlessly into there, because most websites seem to follow a fairly standard format, these blocks of text within another block that has calls to action, and then maybe there's some photos and some bullet points, and you know, so it's really not too hard to integrate those in there seamlessly and have it flow naturally from the copy, where people know they're being sold to when they're told a story, right? But they are less likely to care about it.
Yeah.
Right. And so as long as they feel like they're being taken on a nice little adventure, and they're enjoying reading this, and it feels relatable to them and identifiable, and they're starting to trust you as a brand and a product and a business, and you're solving their problems, then they're going to be more likely to click that button when it pops up instead of going, oh, geez, a buy now button, you know?
Yeah. Yeah. And you work with lots of different clients. What do clients consistently get wrong that you have to kind of teach them about, or what are people's expectations wrong about how to write the copy for their website and for marketing in general? Do you find yourself forever going like, I'm going to have to explain this to you? You know, not in a nasty way, but that's our job as experts. Other people don't get where we're coming from, and that's the value in what we do. Is it one of those things where you have to keep educating people in the nicest possible way?
Well, I think, you know, one of the things is really what we just talked about, is really telling them that their message has to be customer forward at all times, and really making sure that they take themselves out and take the company. You know, sometimes there's an ego involved if you're dealing with, you know, some entrepreneurs, or, you know, it happens in business, right? But usually once that's explained and they see the two things side by side, it's usually pretty easy to resolve those. There's also an occasional issue where somebody else in the company is who's not directly involved in the creative process is giving me notes on the process, and often that person is terribly boring. Like I've had that with
like a lawyer or something.
Yes, exactly. Yeah, in fact, that's been the most common occurrences with lawyers. Nothing against lawyers, but y'all aren't copywriters. You're great at doing the legal stuff. But
exactly, it's like you kind of chipping in on the contract and go, can we not put the word very there? And you go like, that's not really how it works.
Yeah. So sometimes, you know, you just have to sit down with everybody and be like, I only want to hear one voice and one set of notes. And, you know, obviously if there's something about compliance and legal issues that have to be, you know, there, like GDPR or something like that, that's another ballgame.
There's something very skilled you're doing. I remember I wrote an article for the Reader's Digest, and they fact-checked it really well. It's a story of me getting a brain scan. It was a humorous story of all the little funny things that happen along the way, and as they do when you go for a brain scan. And I said at one point, you know, they strapped my head to the table, which is basically what they do when you have a brain scan. And they're so fastidious about the fact-checking. The radiographer said, we don't strap the head to the table. They simply put it in a cradle. It's like, a cradle that's like that with a bit over top and there's a lock on it. But it's like it took away one of my jokes they changed, you know, strap my head to a table to, they then put my head on a cradle but was simply resting and something like that. You know? So I feel your pain when somebody kind of messes with your work. Obviously, sometimes you have to do that for legal or compliance reasons, but it's like, don't mess with the process. It's
right.
You know what you're doing.
But but ultimately, as a copywriter, you're working as essentially a gun for hire in these situations, right? It's I try not to make it mercenary, but when you think about it, at the end of the day, it sort of is like, okay, here's some money, kill these guys, and then we'll see you later, right? And that's not exactly what I'm doing, and it's more involved with that. And I actually go out of my way to work with conscious, purpose-driven companies, so everything comes from a higher place, and it's more purpose-driven and mission-oriented. And but ultimately, it is their website, and but you do have to remind them occasionally that they are paying you to be the expert in these circumstances, and that they probably should listen to you since they did just pay you a bunch of money for your opinion.
Yeah, anyone who ever consulted will know this pain. I was in South Africa doing technical broadcast stuff when I was in broadcast technology, and I gave this person my advice, and he goes, "Well, we're not going to do that." And I go like, okay, but that's what you paid me, £1,000 a day to tell you. So I mean, like, well, we should do something else, shouldn't we? I go like, no, you should do what I just told you, because that's my advice. So anyone who's ever consulted will kind of, in any form, will know that's part of the process. But of course, if people understood everything you were doing and got it, they wouldn't need you. So you also have to. There's no point moaning about it. It's like, if everyone got storytelling as well as you did, then you'd be out of a job.
Well, something I've been running across recently, too, is a lot of people are paying big money to different firms for branding services and copywriting, and getting just basically really expensive garbage back. And it's rather shocking, actually. I'm just surprised at how many people are out there calling themselves experts on things and are just not getting it. And I don't know. I would like to know what their sales pitch is, so I could sort of adopt that for myself and raise my rates accordingly, perhaps. But it's pretty amazing to me what's passing for this sort of thing right now, and so much of it isn't customer centric, which to me is clearly the whole point, because if we're not getting people in, there's a point clearly when you become such a big brand where that's not important, like Nike, for instance, but everybody in the entire world knows who Nike is at this point, except maybe for some of those tribes that live on the islands where you're not allowed to go, right? And so they can just say anything they want, like they could just say, buy shoes or not, we don't care. That could be their slogan. It doesn't matter. It really doesn't matter to Nike.
We got a new shoe, buy it, loser.
But if you're anybody smaller than that, it is really important that people, go to your website and they know immediately who you are, what you're doing, what you're going to do for them, and why they should care. And if they don't, on that first 10 seconds of looking or less,
they're gone.
They're going to click and go to the next thing or watch a cat video.
And most beginning entrepreneurs, you go to their website and I can't even work out what they're doing. Sometimes they're my own clients and just go like, this bears no relation to what you told me. I go, oh, right. Oh, yeah, that needs updating. So that's a typical thing. So we're in Bali. You live here now permanently, don't you?
Pretty much, yeah.
Yeah. How did you wash up in Bali?
Well, wash up is a strong word, especially since there was no water at my villa this morning.
Oh, really? Welcome to Bali.
Yeah. Well, we were joking, me and a couple of the people in the villas today, that Bali's tourist logo should be Bali. It's always something. It would just be brilliant. But it's a really great exercise in patience and acceptance.
Yes, that's right. I was in the raw food restaurant the day I arrived, and they were preparing my meal, and the power went off. And I turned to the guy next to me and said, good job, it's raw food. And he went, yeah. And they brought it anyway because they're not cooking it, which is great.
Yeah.
So how did you end up here?
So basically after, about 2005, I was working on a TV show called My Name is Earl as a grip.
Oh my God, I love that program.
Did you? Yeah, it was fun. It was a nice place to work. Good people. Jason Lee's a great guy. Very funny. And ironically, I was playing a lot of golf at the time, and we were filming on a golf course, and I lifted some huge piece of equipment, which most of the guys that worked at doing what I did were about 3 times my size, but there was a good niche for me because, one, I like doing paperwork, so I often got the job as best boy, and then also like I fit into all the small sets and small places and could scamper around in the rafters 60 feet in the air without too much fear. I even used to take naps up there, which is nuts when I think about it. I had a harness I was strapped in.
Okay.
sometimes. So anyway, I lifted some heavy equipment, and there was a loud popping sound, and that was what was left of my shoulder. 4 out of 5 doctors surveyed said, don't do this anymore. And so I basically had to retire from that. Went up to the Bay Area from Los Angeles, up to San Francisco area, and met some musicians, became friends with a couple of them, started promoting their shows. One of the guitar players pulled me aside, and he's like, hey, I started this online record label. And interestingly, I guess, throughout the whole time I was in film and television production, I also had a side career in the music industry where I've done literally everything except be a musician. So I've been a journalist, I've been a roadie, I've been a stage lighting guy, I've been a manager, like all of these things, right? And he said, hey, I wanted to turn this into a business. And I said, yeah, well, I'm collecting disability checks and going to concerts right now. I will do that for you. So about 3 years later, we turned Floating Records into an actual running business. And I did all of the business development while I was there, all the marketing, wrote all the copy and content, did all the social media, built the website, which was the first time I'd ever even tried to build a website, because what they had before was a train wreck. And then I was like, okay, well, time to pay me. And the guy was like, well, I can't pay you. So it's a startup success story. But I was able to then parlay that into going back to LA. This is kind of a long story. Parlay that into going back to LA and began working as a producer on documentary and reality shows. A lot of things about monsters and ghosts. No Kardashians, although technically those are monsters. But yeah, no. None
you
of that
said don't mention the ghosts because you're too well known for that. So we won't mention the ghosts.
Yes, we won't talk about those things. They're real. No, they're not real. Well, they might be. Who the hell knows? All I know is it made good television.
Tune in next week.
So yes. So then after a few years of that, I realized that that industry was basically kind of slowly circling the bowl in LA, and I really didn't want to do it anymore. And I realized I was really happy when I was writing all the content and copy for online business. So I decided to switch over to that, and did a little training and changed my LinkedIn. And next thing I know, I had a couple of clients. And then I was laying on an acupuncture table, recovering from an injury I sustained at the gym. Let's just say sports hernias are no fun, kids. And I was talking to my acupuncturist, as one does, while being stabbed with sharp metal objects, and about some various things. And she said, have you ever heard have you ever listened to a podcast? And I was like, well, that's funny because, no, I have this app on my phone. I don't know what it does. And she turned me on to Tim Ferriss. Listened to my first podcast that day. Discovered he had a book, The 4-Hour Workweek, which is sort of the Bible for digital nomads, right? Yeah. The early version.
The American Bible, the British Bible is screwwork, let's play.
Yes, it is. It is. Which is a fantastic book. I've read it. It's a page turner. It's a real page turner. And anyway, so that was sort of my introduction to this idea that I was like, oh, wait, I can live wherever I want and do this. And I was like, wait, I have the perfect job for that now. And so I started making my plans to do that and, discovered some other books and blogs and things along the way. And then through research, it kind of narrowed down to Bali and Chiang Mai. And in a very Bali twist, the universe kept telling me to go to Ubud and Bali, which things like I would be listening to a random podcast about travel, and then all of a sudden a guy would start talking about going to Ubud to build a business, which was not in the description. And at the moment he did that, I'd look up and I just turned on the Bali Way in Marina Del Rey, California. And things like that happened over and over. And people, a couple of my mentors were like, oh, I know this person in Bali, I know this person in Ubud. And so I decided to wash myself up here, as it were.
Wow.
And that's how it all started a couple of years ago. And I left on the day before the last U.S. presidential election. And,
good timing.
And because I flew across the Pacific and landed, on the other side of the world, with the date change, that day does not exist in my timeline, which is awesome. So
and Hillary won, so that's great.
So I've heard. Yeah, I don't know. I don't keep track of these things anymore.
That's great. And now you're doing a lot alongside everything else. You're doing you're helping run the comedy improv group here, the kind of self-led group, I guess it is, which I've been to, which is fantastic.
Thanks. Yeah, that just sort of happened. It's funny, I had a birthday this year, and I wrote a list of all the things I wanted to do this year, and I just sort of got very quiet and just sort of let things, flow out as one does here, and do stand-up comedy ended up on the list. And about 2 weeks later, I was messaging with a friend about a book she's writing, and basically explaining to her there's no such thing as writer's block, because she'd been complaining about that. Because there are things such as procrastination, laziness, not being prepared, not wanting to do it, not being healthy enough mentally to, there are many things. So we call them writer's block, but writer's block can become this thing. And if you just eliminate it as a possibility, life becomes much easier, right?
I would agree.
And then out of the blue, she says, hey, have you ever done stand-up? And over the last year and a half or so, I've been sort of receiving downloads of a routine and writing them down in Evernote. So I basically had a routine already written down that I didn't know what I was supposed to do with.
Wait a minute, receiving downloads?
Just sort of like, driving along and just getting a bunch of ideas in my head for jokes when I wasn't really thinking about anything else. I do like good thinking when I'm riding a motorcycle, apparently. Which is just sort of a dangerous time to be thinking and not looking for chickens and dogs running into the road.
Giant holes in the road.
Yeah, giant holes. Mysterious piles of gravel that appear on the side of the road
which
here.
you had a slight
Yeah.
snafu with.
Yeah, so anyway, there was an improv group and they were doing a comedy show. They were at an open mic. I ended up doing stand-up and doing quite well for my first time. They asked me to join the improv group and felt like I'd been doing it my whole life. And that was about over 3 months ago. And now I'm just sort of helping run the thing and keeping it going. And I've done performances of improv and stand-up since. And
great, and I've seen them. No, I think you're a natural. So if people want to find out more about you, what's the easiest way to do that? Is it your website or LinkedIn?
You can find me on LinkedIn. Right now, I'm actually in the middle of a rebrand, a new website coming up, so I feel like I'm getting caught without my britches up a little bit on that question. But if you look up Baydream Creative, that's BAYDREAM, Creative, on LinkedIn or Facebook, you will find me.
Cool.
And the new site and brand is going to be called Story for Everything. And it's officially Story for Everything Copywriting Studio. Okay. And that should be up hopefully by the first of the year, if my designer and I can ever agree where to meet again to actually get the work done.
And are you on LinkedIn under your own name, Michael Burns?
Yeah, it's Michael Burns, I think, /Baydream Creative.
Okay.
So should be able to find me there.
Thank you, Michael. Fascinating stuff. What a life you've had.
Thanks, John. It's a pleasure to be here.
Cheers.
Thanks for listening to this episode of the Ideas Lab podcast. Please do subscribe, and if you've enjoyed this episode, it would be great if you could leave us a review. You can get links and details of everything mentioned in the podcast in the show notes, along with photos and video clips from many of our episodes. Just go to theideaslab.org/podcast.